The aim of this presentation is to give you an idea and give you an overview of what's involved in the conservation and preservation of artwork and illustrations from the Society's papers, and to share with you some of the things that are considered as the conservation work is carried out and the sort of decisions that are made. The Society's artworks and illustrations are really quite unique. Some of them are incredibly detailed. They are very finely drawn, have tremendous detail on some of the paintings, and some of them are quite stunning to actually look at. They cover quite a wide range of subjects. A lot of them are of a botanical nature, but you'll come across images of insects, of animals, of fish, and a whole range of sea life. And occasionally you'll come across landscapes where perhaps a particular tree or particular plant is the focus of attention. From my point of view, I never know what I'm going to come across next. If we could move to the first slide, please. And can you move on to the next one, please? Thank you. That's great. Normally, I'll receive parts of the collection, and they will be in usually a paper wrapper or perhaps an envelope. And the envelope may have on it the name of the person that presented the paper. It's likely to have a reference, and it may, but not always, have the name of the artist, although in some cases the name of the artist is unknown. I don't actually receive the papers that accompanied the illustrations. On the screen, you can see two individual items from two separate papers. On the left-hand side, we have a series of watercolors. There are 4 watercolors which are on individual pieces of paper which have been mounted onto a backing board. And around the illustrations at the top and at the bottom of the paper, there's a few notations in graphite pencil. The piece on the right is a letter, and it's a bifold, so it's a folded sheet of paper. The writing and the illustrations are in Ingall ink, and if you look to the right-hand side of the letter, about 3/4 of the way down, you'll see a small red area. And this is part of a red shellac applied seal, which was used to seal the letter when it was originally folded. Some of the collections will have just 1 or 2 pieces in. Others will have much larger numbers. The largest collection I've come across to date had 56 different botanical illustrations. Those later on. If we could move to the next slide, please. This is the recto, the front of an illustration. And the first thing I'll do is, when I receive these, is to take a good look at what I have. So first of all, I want to establish whether it's a watercolor, whether it's a pen and ink drawing, whether it's graphite pencil, whether it's printed, or whether it's a combination of different media. If it's a watercolor, I'll look very closely, because quite often you'll find that there may be an underdrawing, which is a very light sketch in pencil of what was originally intended. And sometimes you'll find that when the piece was completed, there will be quite a marked difference between the underdrawing and what's finally been produced. And it's important that I'm aware that the underdrawing is there because it's part of the history of the actual piece itself. So this is the recto, this is the front of the item. And if we could turn to the next slide, this is the verso. And you may be able to make out that on the top right-hand corner in graphite pencil, there's a reference. And to be honest, in first looking at this piece, it looks as if the verso is blank. But in fact, in the top half of the paper, there are about 7, 8 lines of graphite pencil text, which has been written vertically. If we could move on to the next slide, we've now rotated the image and hopefully you'll be able to see that the text is there. It's very, very faint. I'm not absolutely certain how many lines there are. A lot of it I can't actually make out what it says. But again, it's part of the history of the piece. And although we can't see it that clearly now, it may be that in the future, with the way technology changes, that there may be a way of actually perhaps lighting, filming, reading this in the future. So it's important, again, that even though the writing is very slight, I'm aware that it's there and we make every effort to preserve it as it is. If we could move on to the next item, please. This is watercolor of some scallop shells. It's a much larger piece, and some of the pieces you've seen so far haven't had very much damage. This one has been folded on a number of occasions, and it's torn across some of the folds. There's also an area that's missing at the top of the piece, along the top. And you have image here of the recto on the left and the verso, the back of the item, on the right. And looking at the verso, you will see that there are some little patches. So there's some items that have been repaired with tape. And on the left-hand side, halfway down, you'll see a linen strip. And that's been used to try and keep broken paper together. We're going to come back and have another look at this item at a later stage. If we could turn to the overhead camera, please. This is a rather nice image, and one of the first processes would be to actually clean any surface dirt from the image. And the idea of doing this is that it just stops the surface dirt being transferred from one item to another as you're handling different pieces. This particular piece, I've already done a little bit of cleaning on. So it's been cleaned from this area here to just down here. And it's the lower part. And I think on the screen, it does look slightly darker. This is the area that needs to be cleaned. When cleaning, I'm using either a smoke sponge, and this is a smoke sponge in its original wrapping. It's quite a large block, and the smoke sponge actually absorbs surface dirt. And I'll show you that in a moment. And the other item I'll use for cleaning is a soft eraser. And again, fairly large. Both of these I'll cut down and use in smaller blocks. And when cleaning, first of all, I'll support the document with my left hand to keep everything firm. And I'll clean in a systematic fashion. And I'll usually use a circular motion. And the reason for using a circular motion is that it should evenly clean the surface. When we come to the edges, you tend to use a more linear motion, but the main thing is that using a linear motion, you have to avoid getting a streaky finish. I'll just do a little bit more cleaning. And then if you turn just put that up to the camera, you can see that it's beginning to absorb some of the dirt. And what happens is when this absorbs a lot more dirt, you can just take a pair of scissors and just cut away the top surface of the smoke sponge. And then you can continue to use it until it's too small to hold. So that's the smoke sponge. The eraser, I think, may be more effective on the bottom edge, but again, it's used in a circular motion, and it's actually taking a bit more surface dirt off. The main thing to be aware of is that there's now quite a lot of debris on the surface, and once the area has been cleaned, I'll just use a soft brush just to remove any of the debris. I'll also lift it up from the pressing paper because you get little bits going underneath. I don't want this to become embedded in the artwork. So hopefully you can see that it is a little bit cleaner in this area, but what I'd like to do is you just turn this over to the verso, and hopefully you'll be able to see quite a marked contrast. This area has been cleaned with smoke sponge and with the eraser, and the bottom area is yet to be cleaned. And every single item that goes through conservation, I'll surface clean, even if it doesn't look as if there's dirt there, because usually there is something, even if it's only very slight. We're just going to swap over the items. Thank you. And I just want to just get rid of those. And we're coming back to the image that you saw on the PowerPoint earlier. It's quite a large piece. It's suffered quite a bit of damage, particularly at the head here, where there's missing areas. And where it's folded, you can see there are numerous tears on the folds. Again, missing areas here and numerous tears along the bottom. And one of the things I want to try and show you, if we can bring it up to the camera. Don't know if that's in focus. On the edge here where it's torn, there's a slightly lighter area. And what has happened is that where it's torn, the paper is actually feathered. And the reason that you can see the slightly lighter area is that the paper fibers are misaligned at the moment. And it's important, particularly if the feathering goes across, say, an area of the illustration or the watercolor, that you get the feathering in the right direction. Otherwise, the illustration, you're actually breaking up the surface of what's been painted onto the paper. I'm going to turn this over. Again, just get it back into screen. I'm going to turn this over onto the recto. And you can see now that there are a number of areas where there are patches. There's 2 layers here. There's a thin layer there. There's 2 layers here. This is a piece of linen tape. There's another layer here, and there has been a patch there. If this piece has actually been cleaned already, and the first thing we'd do is try and remove the paper patches. These are quite loose. I'm using a fine spatula, and usually you can just gently ease the tape and lift it from the surface. And you go fairly slowly one of the things I want to avoid doing is skinning the surface of the paper. Now this is coming off quite cleanly, and you can see there the piece that's been removed. There's 2 layers there. The other thing I'd look for at this stage is to see whether there's a layer of adhesive there. There isn't on that particular one, but again, if we have a look at the bottom here, and just where my thumb is, hopefully you can see that, there's a thick layer of adhesive where a patch has been. And with something like that, what I would tend to do is to take a scalpel and just to really carefully, very slowly, see if I can reduce the layer of the adhesive and take it down. I'm not going to do it now because it's quite a slow and quite delicate process, but you sometimes find that the adhesive has hardened and then crumbled, and it breaks away from the surface quite easily. So first of all, I'll try and remove as much of that as I can. If there's a thick paper patch, again, you can use the edge of the scalpel at a really low angle and just very carefully and very slowly just pare down the layers of the thick paper until you can reduce it. Once I've got the layer of adhesive down, I'll place a sheet of pressing paper underneath, and I'll use a little bit of moisture to try and soften the adhesive. But one of the things that's quite crucial is, and I'm sort of bringing the sponge out quite a bit, is to control the amount of moisture that you actually use on the surface of the item. And the reason for this is if you get it too wet, you can disturb weak paper fibers. But the other issue is if it's too wet, you're in danger of actually setting up a tide mark, which when it dries then becomes a permanent feature. And that's the one thing I want to avoid. And again, I'm not going to actually do it because it takes time, but I'm just going to explain it, that normally what I would do is just to gently dab the surface of the paper with the sponge, just very slightly, and allow the adhesive to soften, and then to, using the edge of the spatula, is just gently scrape away the softened layers. And what I would also do is from time to time, I'll place a piece of Bondina on the surface, and a piece of pressing paper, and just rub over the surface that's been damp, and the friction from my hands will help to dry it out at that particular point. The Bondina acts as like a release paper. It's a release material, I should say. And although sometimes it does stick to the item, it can just easily be peeled off from the surface. And the other thing I forgot to mention, and I'll mention at this stage, is when I'm working on a particular piece, I've got it supported on a layer of absorbent pressing paper. So that's the white sheet. And this is the layer of Bondina. And the reason I have it supported like this is that if I want to work on the top edge, rather than pick the item up, I can just swivel it round on the support to an angle that makes it easier for me to work at. So I'm trying to minimize the amount of actual handling of the piece. Can we have the next piece, please? Thank you. Swap that over. This again is supported on a sheet of Bondina. This too has been cleaned, and I should have mentioned that if you're using water, it's always best that the item is actually cleaned first. Otherwise, you can actually fix the dirt into the surface of the paper. When we're repairing, we try to keep the repairs as minimal as possible, just basically to support the areas that are weak or areas that are torn or damaged. With something like this, you'll find that the main text is on the recto and the verso will probably be reasonably blank. And so the bulk of the repairs will go onto the verso. We're using Japanese papers, and there is a range of papers that you can use of various thicknesses and various weights. This is one that I've selected for this particular piece. This is, and please excuse my pronunciation, this is Kizuki Tozo Corso, and it's 18 GSM, and that means it's 18 grams per square meter. It's a handmade Japanese paper, and I'm not sure if you can see. Yes, you can. This has been made in a mold, and you'll see the areas there, which are the chain lines from the mold. And if you look at the top edge and the side edge, you've got a slightly thicker area of paper and you've got a deckled edge. So that's where the edge of the mold was when it was in the mold. So that's one paper that we use, and I'd use that for the repairs on the verso. I'll need to put some kind of supports over the tears on the recto here, and for that I'll use another paper which is called Tengujo, and this is 11 GSM. The papers themselves look quite thin, but the main thing is that they have long paper fibers, and it's long paper fibers that will give the Japanese paper tremendous strength. When I'm selecting papers for repair, I'll try and use something that will still be visible, but will be blend in with the original item. So you'll be able to see where the repair has been applied. What I don't want to do is to use a paper that's very dark, where you'd actually be able to really see where the repair is. I don't want a sharp contrast between the repair and the actual item, because I don't want to detract from the beauty of the piece itself. Now I'm going to just turn this over, and I've selected an area for repair. We have Eingold ink notation number here. We have a little bit missing area here, a little bits missing area here, a few tears, there's one there, there's a couple there, and a little bit missing from the bottom edge. So what I'm going to do is to use a piece of Japanese paper, and I'm going to draw the shape of a repair on the Japanese paper. And for the purpose of this demonstration, I'm going to use a much darker pencil than I would normally, so that you can actually see the edge that I'm going to draw. We tried this in practice, and normal pencil I use, you just can't see what I've done. For protection, I've placed a piece of Melanex over the surface of the item so that the darker pencil won't actually go through the Japanese paper and mark the original piece. So put the paper in place. And what I'm going to do first, just for my own benefit, is just make a couple of little marks so I know where to start. I need an idea of where the high points of the tears are. There's one there, and there's also the text. Come on, just a little bit more. And then just mark off approximately where I'm going to come off, which is about there. So I'll come on with a straight line so that when the repair goes down, it can firmly adhere. The rest of the shape will be curved, just very slightly. I'll bring it up where there's areas of damage, and then come back down where it doesn't need to be. I'll come closer here, and then bring it up just around the text, around the tear, and come around. And come off at the bottom. And what we'll do is lift that up to the camera. You can now see the shape that's been drawn. So the next process is to form the repair, and this can be done in different ways. I have a preference of using a mattress needle, and I'll use a mattress needle to score the surface of the paper, and I'll score just inside the pencil line. And if I want to change the shape at this stage, I can. You'll find that other conservators may have a preference for using perhaps a very fine brush with a slight amount of water, or maybe a water pen. Really, we're all achieving the same result. It's just that people have different ways of doing things, and you'll find this throughout conservation processes. So I'm just going to score just inside the pencil line, and I'm going to follow the shape. I've got the repair paper supported with my left hand, and I'm needling out onto a piece of pressing paper, and that just allows the needle to flow nice and smoothly over the surface of the paper without catching it. Apologies if I go quiet for a moment, it's just so I can concentrate. And I'm going to come straight off at the end. If you were to come off at a slight angle, it gives the opportunity in future for the repair just to catch up along the edge. So usually have it well anchored at the bottom. The scoring doesn't actually cut through the repair paper. I've not actually cut right the way through the repair paper with the needle, and that's quite an important point to make. The next thing to do is to tear out the repair, and hopefully you'll be able to see this. I'm going to pull out from the score mark and just slowly part the paper. And by pulling outwards along the paper, you then get the paper fibres standing out at a right angle to the edge. And I can then tease these out. I don't know whether you can actually see the fibres. Got a bit of black card, whether that actually. So they're actually just protruding about 2 millimeters from the actual edge. Sorry, sometimes it's quite difficult to see. Something like that. So if we bring this back and get rid of the Melanax. Now blown the tissue across a tabletop, which was not intentional. That can then go in place. And I'm just going to anchor the bottom edge with a glass weight. And we use a wheat starch adhesive. This is Shofu. It's a really good quality refined wheat starch, and it's had the gluten removed, and the repair can then be attached. I'll lift this back and just lightly paste out an area, and beforehand just pop down another piece of pressing paper and Bondina. So that can be pasted. And the repair paper goes down in place. And I'll just put a light amount of adhesive on the surface, just brushing outwards. And then using the sponge, which again is just very slightly moist, literally just dab the surface to lift the surplus adhesive away from the repair and the item itself. And again, one of the reasons for dabbing is that it's very easy, particularly with a very thin Japanese tissue, that it can actually disturb the paper fibers. So that area has been secured, and we'll just put a piece of Bondina on top, piece of pressing paper, rub it through, lift up just to check to see that the adhesive is clear, put it back down and put a weight on top and continue putting the rest of the repair down. There's not going to be time to finish this particular one, but once that has been completed and has been left to dry, we can then turn it over, and where there are areas missing, like at the top, this can be infilled, and where there are fine tears on the verso, they can be anchored down, and I'd use a piece of the Tengujo, and that's a very fine, very thin splint, and that will be enough to secure an area that's torn down, and will anchor it in place so that even with handling, it won't open up. The Other thing with the adhesive is that it's a reversible adhesive. So if we need to take the repair off at a later stage, it's quite easy to do. You will have noticed that the repair overlaps the edge of the item. And once this is dry, this will just be trimmed back to the edge with either a pair of scissors or with a ruler and a scalpel, so that we just do it flush to the edge. So we'll just move that one out of the way for the moment. And could we switch back to the PowerPoint, please? And if you move on to the next slide, please. This will show the recto and verso of a particular piece. There is a little damage to the verso. There's damage to the top left-hand edge, and there's a couple of little tears. On the recto, you'll see on the right-hand edge, there's some little areas of tissue repairs. If we could move to the next slide, please. Sorry, can we go to the next slide, please? Oh, right. Oh, yeah, that's great. Sorry. Apologies. You can now see, well, I couldn't to begin with, you can now see where the repairs are along the edges on the recto on the right-hand side and on the verso on the left-hand side. So you can see the repairs protruding, and those will be trimmed. If we could move back to the camera, please. And this is the actual piece. It's been finished. Each illustration be protected in a bifold, so a folded sheet. In this case, I'm using Heritage Wood-Free Book White, which is 315 GSM. If I have a collection, what I'll do is find the length, the largest piece, and the width, and I'll take that measurement and then add 20 millimeters to the height and to the width. And that means that when it's in the bifold, it sits quite nicely in the center and it's well protected. The other feature is that the bifold corners have been rounded, and that's to prevent them getting caught up and bent in storage. And I'd just like to go back to the PowerPoint if there's time. And I've decided to just finish by showing you a number of completed items, just so you get an idea of how beautiful some of these pieces can be, but also the range of subject matter. This is from the large collection, 56 pieces. It's broken down into many different stages of the plant. And if you look on the right-hand side, just above the central seed pod, you'll see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 dark areas. And what they are is they're parts of the pressed flower, but unfortunately over time they've darkened. And I think in one instant, the one that's much longer, it's actually lifted from the surface of the paper and you've got the staining where it used to be. So this is one piece. If we could move to the next slide, please. Although this is on its side, I've added this to illustrate how fine some of the watercolors can be. And again, on the left-hand side, towards the very bottom, there are 3 very small traces of pressed flour on the surface, and they're the slightly browner area that's by the lower leaf there. That's it, that's the area there. But I'm sure you'll agree that this is actually quite a beautiful piece of art in its own right. If we could move on to the next slide, please. There are some animals in the collection. These are from 2 separate pieces. Some of them are quite quirky. If you look at the image on the right, there's a particular species of monkey, and the male monkey has almost got a human-like face. And some have said that it actually looks quite creepy. And if we could go to the last image, please. And this is really just to show you where a piece has had extensive damage. It has been conserved. A lot of the bottom edge was missing, and where it had been folded, the paper had weakened and split through, and there are a number of tears at the bottom of the right-hand edge. And so if you're looking at the recto, so we've got the recto on the left and the verso on the right, so you can see the repairs on the back. A particular piece like this, you're probably looking at somewhere between, for me, probably between 15 and 20 hours work. So some of them do take a considerable amount of time, but it's worth spending that time to get a good result. And I'd like to finish by thanking you all for listening and for taking part, and also to thank everyone who's given me support in preparing this presentation, and also the technical support on the day. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, John. That was incredibly calming, I have to say, because a lot of our days are spent rushing, and you mentioned the 20 hours to do the repairs on one piece of work, and it's so different from a lot of our jobs where we're frantically going from emails to appointments and meetings. So yes, thank you for that. So there are a few questions in the Q&A, and we're going to get the gloves question out of the way straight away. Why are you not wearing any gloves? And I should say, John as a conservator doesn't wear gloves, but us as archivists, we don't also wear gloves. So, but over to you, John.
So as a conservator, there's probably 2 occasions where I would wear gloves. The first is if I was using a chemical to treat a particular document, and that would be from a health and safety point of view. Since I've been volunteering here, I haven't done any chemical treatment at all, so it hasn't been necessary. The other occasion would be I'd wear cotton gloves if I was handling photographic material and I couldn't actually avoid touching the actual photographic image. Apart from that, gloves never really fit very well anyway, and they're quite cumbersome. And the safest way to handle a document and handle an item is, as long as you have clean, grease-free, dry hands, and you just handle the document very carefully, you're fine. Gloves do tend to make you slightly clumsy, they certainly do me, and you could potentially cause more damage.
Thank you. So I'm going to try and take the questions in kind of some sort of order. There's some questions about the tools you were using, and there's some questions about the practice and the techniques. So someone was asking, what is a smoke sponge? Someone did reply sending a link, but I thought maybe it might be worth you just saying a few words about what is a smoke sponge, because I actually don't know either. So
It's a soft rubberized material, and the idea is that it absorbs surface dirt. It's called a smoke sponge because sometimes it's used when there's a disaster and there's been a fire and you need to remove a sooty deposit. But it's a soft, flexible, rubberized material.
Thank you. Someone else asked, what brush did you use for applying the wheat starch adhesive?
Um, I'm just using a standard, fairly small artist brush with quite fine hairs. It's quite flexible, um, and they're natural fibers.
And what type of eraser would you recommend?
This is a soft eraser, and it's of a conservation standard, and it would have been bought from one of the conservation suppliers.
Um, just going back briefly to the smoke sponge, does it lift the pencil marking?
Yes, that's one of the points that I should have made. Both the eraser and the smoke sponge are capable of lifting um, graphite pencil. That's a really good point. And it does mean that when you come to clean areas where there's graphite pencil, you have to clean very, very carefully. You soften the amount of pressure that you put on the smoke sponge. And what I would do sometimes is, rather than use it in a circular fashion, just literally tap the surface to clean that particular area. But one of the other things where there's very faint graphite pencil, um, what I want to try and do is, if the item is quite dirty, is to graduate the amount of dirt so it doesn't look starkly cleaned around the pencil and then very dirty where the graphite pencil is. So it's a question of just very gradually removing the dirt.
Thank you. There's a couple of questions about oh God, there's so many questions coming in. It's incredible. Um, ah, um, and might be more for you, Janet. I don't know. Um, about getting a full list of materials that you use and where we get the material that you've been using. Sorry, I've lost the question. What supplies do you use for your Japanese paper, heritage bifold, and instrument mattress needles, etc.? No, no, you might have to come close to John, but maybe John knows the answer as well. I don't know.
Um, Hello, yes, there are a few conservation suppliers within the UK. One of the main ones is Preservation Equipment Limited. You can buy erasers and smoke sponges from them. And if you just look them up as PEL is how they name themselves now. If you look them up on, look up their website, they've got an online shop. As far as Japanese papers go, they also sell those, but there's and these aren't the only suppliers, but they're the main ones that I use in the London area. There's a place called Shepherd's Papers. They do a whole range of different weights of Japanese paper, and you can go into their shop and have a look through their sample books. I don't know if it's possible for us to put any information up. Is it, Isabel?
I think maybe the easiest way is to just email us at library@linnean.org, and then it'll get to Janet and Janet
Okay.
can reply to you.
Yeah, and
Library@linnean.org. I'll put it on the chat.
yes. So, were there any other questions regarding?
No, that's it. I think there's just so many questions about techniques and practices that we're going to move on to other questions. Thanks, Janet.
I'll hand you back to
Okay,
John.
thank you. John, one of the other questions, so there's quite a lot about what you do with, would you clean, for example, over areas of paintings or text?
Um, Over areas of paintings, yes, I would initially very carefully do a little test area and clean. But yes, certainly if it's a watercolor, you can clean over the area of the watercolor. Again, with the text, providing if it's iron gall ink or if it's more modern ink, yes, they can be cleaned quite easily. If it's graphite pencil, then you'd have to be very careful about the amount of pressure that you put, and so as not to remove the graphite pencil. Is that
Yeah.
okay?
Yeah, there's someone who asked if there is something written in the corner of a piece and it was dirtied, would you use the smoke sponge instead, or would that still take off the written text?
I would use a smoke sponge, but I'd use it with as little pressure as possible and perhaps just dab the surface of the item and just see if I could clean some of the dirt off. But in some cases, you can't. It's better to leave the text where it is and to leave the dirt where it is. What I don't want to do is to take away something that's part of the history of the piece.
Yeah. Thank you. Uh, how do you deal with the brown spots on old books or papers, and can it spread to other documents in books?
I'll pass you over to Janet, if that's okay.
Hi, I assume you're talking about foxing, which you see in lots of, usually in books, printed books, and quite often opposite print plates, that kind of thing. The cause of it is that there are many explanations as to what causes it. Frankly, you can't remove it without quite drastic measures. I mean, years ago they would bleach paper. We don't do that anymore because it weakens the paper. There are other chemical treatments, but they're questionable. But I suppose the answer is there's not much you can do about it. I will say that when it comes to printed matter like books, if it has staining and foxing on it, as long as you can read the text underneath, the view that we take is that the thing is still usable. And so we don't worry about that. It becomes more of a problem when you've got brown spots in the middle of an image, of some kind of printed image. But again, very difficult to do anything about it. And these days, I probably wouldn't make any attempt to get rid of that staining if it's foxing.
Thanks, Janet. Maybe keep it on just in case, or
Yeah.
you might want to give it back to John. How would you deal with mold on paper?
Oh, yeah. Well, first of all, what mold does to paper is that it eats away at the paper fibers so it can weaken the paper. Again, mold on paper, if possible, you need to remove the cause of the mold, which could be the environment that it's in. So if you've got moldy paper, the first thing you want to do is make sure, maybe do a bit of surface cleaning, but you need to be careful that you're not, some mold on books can be quite can compromise your health. I've known people end up in hospital if they've been around a lot of moldy paper with lung problems. So be careful, first of all. Secondly, if you can remove or brush away some of the loose mold on there, that helps. Then after that, the simplest thing is to try and keep the item in an environment that is not conducive to mold growth. So in other words, make sure that it's somewhere dry and not too cold. I always say this only obviously depends on where you live, but if it's comfortable for you in the UK, then it's comfortable for a book. Not too hot, not too cold. There are ways of treating it. You can use a mixture of TCP, 10% to ethanol or methanol if that's what you have available, but it does smell, and that dries very quickly. You can dab that over the book, but will it kill the mold? Not if the book gets damp again, but it might just arrest it. So
would you do that? Would you use that on paper though, Janet?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
But again, if I were working on the sort of things that John is working on, which is paintings and stuff, you've got to be very careful about any kind of chemical that you add. It won't do the pencil markings any harm, but a watercolor might well be damaged permanently. So you've got to be very, very careful before you start using any kind of solvent or.
Okay. I've got quite a few other questions, and I realize that it's only 2 minutes. So very quickly, John, or maybe Janet, I don't know. Would you ever recommend the use of archival tape for documents, particularly for small archives who don't have access to budget for conservators?
Yes, and there are some very good ones out there that you can buy from. You can buy some online. You can buy them from conservation suppliers. You know, it's a case of if you've got a tear and you're trying to make sure the tear doesn't get any worse. I don't think there's a problem with using these tapes. I will say that they're not overly strong. So if you're going to handle something a lot, it might gradually come away. But generally speaking, when I've had to deal with them, if I find these sort of conservation type tapes on any item that I'm then conserving and I want to remove it so that I can do a more permanent repair, they come away quite easily and without too much damage. That's my experience. So yeah, it's fine. Better than nothing. If that's all you've got. Yeah.
Great, thank you. There's one question that I wanted to leave to last, but I'm going to take it now. And then there's 2 or 3 people who have who are looking for advice, which I'll, hopefully they can stay until after 3. But I'm not planning to go much more beyond 3. But the question is, what's the most interesting item you've conserved during your career, John?
That's a tough question, actually. I suppose the most well-known would be I was part of a team of 3, 2 conservators and 1 book conservator, who worked on the conservation of Great and Little Doomsday books. And this was prior to the 900th anniversary, when volume was broken down so that a full colour facsimile could be made. And I was one of the conservators working on that particular piece. I probably did about 50% of the repairs on Great Doomsday and the same on Little Doomsday. And every single bifold had to have a very thin, very fine parchment repair. So that's probably the most well known. But I have to say that some of the items that I'm working on here give me tremendous pleasure.
John, thank you so much for such a brilliant talk and live demonstration. We hadn't done that before, but it worked really well. So thank you enormously. Thank you everyone who has joined us, and see you next time. Bye.